Murphy's Law. Robert Burns wrote, "The best laid plans of mice and men gang aft angly, and mony a sigh of grief and pain for promised joy. My mother used to say, there's many a slip twixt cup and the lip." Murphy's Law sums it up. Anything that can go wrong will. All of those foreboding statements came true the first pie supper I ever sponsored. I was at Wilson School. The children and I had planned in detail. We borrowed a 2-kettle burner, tabletop kerosene stove, and a kettle to heat hot dogs in. Bought the hot dogs, buns, mustard, and ketchup. Mr. Arthur Taylor, a local merchant and father of my dear friend, had let us have them at wholesale. I don't remember how we got the meat stamps to buy them. Perhaps the children contributed them. Most country people had their own meat and didn't use their meat stamps. We chilled soda pop in tubs of chipped ice that some kind parent had brought from Caneyville. We only had grape and orange. Cokes were a war casualty, as they were sent to the soldiers in the front, as were candy and chewing gum. We borrowed coal oil, we didn't say kerosene, lamps, to light the schoolhouse, and put a long paper-covered board between the teacher's desk and another table to put pies on. The crowd was gathering and the schoolhouse was about full. It was early in the fall, cool enough that the house was not sweltering, and warm enough that we did not need a fire in the pot-bellied stove. A couple of parents were helping out with the pie entries and the hot dog sales while I circulated amongst the guests, when the local drunk walked in. I looked up to see why everybody got so quiet suddenly, and saw a skinny man, well over 6 feet tall, about 30 years old. He had unkempt, rusty red hair that stuck out from underneath a baseball-type cap. He had a hooked nose, beady blue eyes, and red, bushy eyebrows in a long face. His thin lips covered discolored, decayed, and gapped teeth. He was wearing bib overalls and a plaid flannel shirt, which was none too clean. I learned later that the crowd was frightened of him because he never came out in public unless he was drunk. And when he was drunk, he was mean. Not 5 minutes later, he was on the floor in front of the pies, and the young man in whose home I boarded was on top of him, hitting him in the face. I didn't know what happened to bring on the fight, but evidently my friend must have asked him to leave. Now I know someone should have given him a hot dog and gently told him outside. Instead, everyone else skedaddled, including me. That schoolhouse emptied fast. I asked Mr. Taylor if he would go in and turn off the stoves, blow out the lamps, close the windows, and lock up for me. The man who had fought the intruder had taken his wife and baby and gone home. Mr. Taylor was a mild-mannered, much-respected merchant in his late 50s. He was no fighter. It must have taken courage to go into the schoolhouse by himself, where the drunk man was still wandering around. He said he got the stove turned off and the lights out when he realized he was in the dark with a drunk who might have a knife. He said, "Hey, buddy, got a match?" intending to light a lamp and bring it out with him, but he didn't have one. They got outside. Mr. Taylor locked the door, got in the car where Mrs. Taylor, Juanita, and I were waiting, scared to death. As we started to pull out, Buddy, who was wandering unsteadily in the schoolyard, yelled, "Hey, Arthur, wait!" Mrs. Taylor, who was inclined to be nervous, said, "You'd better stop, Arthur. He may have a gun." Mr. Taylor stopped. Buddy came over to the car and handed him a match. We departed, leaving our precious hot dogs ruining in the hot water. Not only had we used up our meat stamps, but I was out the money from my own pocket. I was glad to be leaving with nobody hurt. I've never been so frightened in my whole life. Looking back, I can see that I and the whole crowd overreacted, and if the situation had been handled differently, we could have salvaged the pie supper. The next pie supper I sponsored, I was prepared for any eventuality, including having the county sheriff come to auction the pies. Since then, when I have planned for any special event, I go over each detail mentally beforehand and try to anticipate anything that can go wrong. I make lists of what to do and who is responsible for doing them. I check lists of needed supplies and see that they are on the premises. Since that pie supper at Wilson School in 1944, I've been fairly successful in outwitting Mr. Murphy.